My name is Jose Enriquez, and I'll be talking about if the federal minimum wage should be raised. Should the federal minimum wage be raised? The big question that always pops up in debates and political arguments, with both sides making valid argument points on whether the minimum wage should be raised or not. This is just another point on whether the minimum wage should be raised. The federal minimum wage should not be raised. This could lead to a domino effect that will not be good for the United States because there are many reasons why the minimum wage should not be raised. As stated by procons.org in an argumentative article, minimum wage, raising of the minimum wage would increase housing costs. If the minimum wage is increased, companies may use more robots and automated processes to rely on service employees. The minimum wage would also force businesses to lay off employees, and it would also increase poverty. One should understand the reasons how people cannot live with the minimum wage. It has been seen firsthand in how adults have to have two or more jobs and seen that the adults cannot live within the minimum wage. But if the federal minimum wage is increased, it could cause even more hardship for our people. To begin with, if the minimum wage would be increased, quoted by procon.org, it would, so to speak, would increase the housing costs. This is shown in other states around the United States. The demand for housing is more than the state can supply. For example, California has raised the minimum wage, and in fact, the housing cost has also increased. It is shown one bedroom, one bathroom apartments in Los Angeles, California is between $300,000 to $1 million. This is absurd just to think that the housing cost is this much just for a one bedroom apartment. This is a prime example of what would happen to the housing costs if the minimum wage would be increased. The housing costs would increase, and so would the rental costs of the house. This is a chain of events. The rental price also would go up. The rental price for a one bedroom apartment in Los Angeles, California is an average $2,000 up and up a month. Let's jump into some math to see how much the minimum wage employees would be able to waste on rent for a one bedroom apartment in Los Angeles, California. Let's say the federal minimum wage employee would be increased to $15 an hour. With the cost of Los Angeles rental policies just for 2020, a typical full-time worker would work 40 hours per week. This is $600 a week, which is $2,400 a month. A one-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles is $2,000 a month. The monthly rate for the apartment is about 80% of the employee's monthly paycheck. This is crazy to think about because people cannot live within the housing to cost this much. Minimum employees would then have to rely on government policies to assist them in living in today's world. Minimum wage employees will not be able to live like this even in Los Angeles, California now. If the minimum wage would increase nationwide, that would make the housing market also increase due to employees having an increase in their yearly rate of pay. Somebody does not want to see families and young adults live homelessly because they are not able to pay for housing or rental, or rent monthly and become homeless. Also, companies have already invested in replacing the humans with robots. As quoted in procon.org, if the minimum wage is increased, companies may use more robots and automated processes to replace services for employees. Robots should not have to replace humans just because companies cannot pay employees just because the federal minimum wage has been increased. Automotive companies are already doing this just because the demand for cars have increased over time. And if the wages would be increased, it would force these companies to lay off workers and replace them with robots. Even with technology advancing every year, it should not replace the working human. If the wages would increase, it would then turn to increased technology advancement just to replace the human worker. It has already been seen new machines at the McDonald's drive-thru have replaced people's jobs. The company has a machine where it can take a cup and fill it up with whatever drink the customer has ordered. Back in high school, about 6 years ago, most teenagers worked at fast food restaurants. Companies would have an employee make drinks for the drive-thru. That employee would have a full-time job just serving drinks. That shows that companies are already replacing humans. That machine has taken somebody's job and has prevented that person who used to make drinks unemployed. Companies will take action on replacing human workers with robots if the minimum wage would escalate. so will the surge to replace humans with robots. That is un-American for some machine to take a person's job. Why, you ask, un-American? America is where you come to get a job, get a paycheck, live in a nice home, not to be replaced by some robot or machine. Besides, if the if the minimum wage would also be increased, it would force businesses to lay off employees. Without a doubt that these companies will have no problem laying people off and raising the unemployment level. At this moment now, some understand why the unemployment rate is at an all-time high due to the COVID-19 virus. But if the federal minimum wage would increase, it would drop the unemployment rate even higher than what it is now. Employers have stated if the minimum wage would increase, they would have to lay workers off. Let's take into account if the wages would be increased to $15 an hour. Small companies that rely on the minimum wage won't be able to pay all their employees, which then would have to force employers to lay off employees, and be short-staffed. Some companies would then below in supply and would have to increase prices for the goods they sell. This is just an example of what would happen if the minimum wage would increase. The minimum wage increase would affect all the small businesses across America. These larger companies will not have no problem laying people off and replacing them with robots, but the small companies will have a hard time keeping up with the increase of the minimum wage. The increase of the minimum wage will force small businesses to lay off employees, making these small businesses unable to flourish. As said by Claus and Jeff in his article Minimum Wage, there is a statistical evidence that a substantial increase in the minimum wage has triggered relatively consistent patterns of unemployment among the least low-skilled workers. Increasing the minimum wage will force companies to lay off workers, and it will increase the unemployment level. The laying off of employees probably will happen later on in time, due to the companies trying to keep up with the payroll. But eventually, employers will start laying off employees, then the unemployment rate will be skyrocketing. In time, the problems for companies will start rising just by increasing the minimum wage. Additionally, raising the minimum wage would increase poverty. Once companies start laying workers off due to the minimum wage, people will have to start looking for other jobs, and most will not be able to pay. That would increase the poverty level, and then companies would have to lay people off, and then would have to increase supply. Eventually, large companies would then close all factories in the United States and start producing in other countries. That would cause major layoffs, and the demand for jobs would exceed the supply of jobs. This would increase the poverty levels at an all-time high. Also, at this current time in our lives now, with the pandemic, companies are closing stores now and having to lay off employees. This is not good for America at the moment. If the minimum wage would increase, it would eventually cause companies to lay off employees. In conclusion, the minimum wage will always be a topic to discuss, and whether it should be raised or not. It won't have a positive effect on the United States. The federal minimum wage should not be raised. This could lead to a domino effect that will not be good for the United States, because there are many reasons why the minimum wage should not be raised. It will do more harm than good. The minimum wage should not be raised. One can see in other states in America that when the wages increase, so does the production of goods, and the housing prices will be increased. Most importantly, the unemployment rate and poverty levels will increase.